So here's what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about equipment, and I'm going to blow through some of this fairly quickly. So I hope it doesn't overwhelm. So stop me when you need to. We'll talk about equipment. I want to talk about your show. I want to talk about audience. I want to talk about construction of an episode, some programming ideas. I want to talk about the key parts of a great presentation. I want to touch on you as a performer. And to Graham, something you were asking earlier, I want to talk about some interview concepts. We'll brush on editing a little bit, about posting and distributing it, and marketing. The last three, getting it out to other people, I'm not claiming to be a huge expert at. Some of you in marketing, you know, it's kind of the Wild West right now as far as getting stuff out there goes, but I'll just give you a little overview of that. All right, so just to clear your brain a little bit, in truth, podcasting or any kind of a show is relatively simple. It is relatively affordable, but I really want you to know, if you don't already, that it is a challenge to do it well. And it is a tremendous challenge to do it consistently well over a long period of time. It's easy to come out guns blazing, but it's that 10th, 15th, 20th episode where you start to, go, and to that point, the more effort you put up front toward, really kind of building a structure for yourself and knowing really what you're trying to achieve with it and how you want to do this, the more energy you put up front, the easier it will be to stay consistent with it. Yeah. So equipment, you got to have some kind of a device. I'm on my laptop right now. I work with someone who I've edited her podcast. She does it on her phone. She connects a quality microphone to her phone. It can be done through a number of devices, but you need that. You need your microphone, and the better, you don't have to spend a lot of money on any of this stuff, but one thing that I would recommend is getting a decent microphone, and we'll talk about that a little more detail coming up, but they don't have to cost a lot of money. A decent microphone, you can get for $100, $150. Obviously microphones go up to, over $10,000, but getting a decent microphone so you sound, do I sound a little better than a normal Zoom call audio wise?
Yeah.
I'm hoping I do. I'm talking through a microphone connected to some stuff I'm talking about right now. So you need a mic, you need mic cable, you need some kind of way to have that device understand the microphone. So in my case, my microphone is connected to a Focusrite, and this is just one. What I have is one brand of several kinds. All this does is take the audio and run it through a USB so my laptop can understand it, because your microphone isn't going to plug into your phone. It's not going to plug into your device. So just from a technical standpoint, you need that. Headphones are very good because, especially if you're doing interviews, you really want to hear what's being recorded, because if there's an issue with that, you want to know in real time while you're doing it. You don't want to find out after it's over that the quality of the audio was terrible and unusable, because your listeners won't suffer that, and they won't come back if they think that the audio quality isn't good. And it won't sound as professional, and it's relatively easy to sound very professional. So getting some decent equipment up front's good. Then you need some recording software. For me, it's built in. I happen to have a MacBook, but any computer you can download audio software into. So I do my editing with GarageBand because it just came for free. The best equipment's the stuff you already have, everybody. The less money you have to spend, the better. And from a standpoint of software, more isn't better. The audio doesn't change when you're editing stuff. It comes down to how I think ease of use and just having something that you know how to work with. Because if it's too complex, it's going to take you too much time, or it's going to be an education you don't need and don't want. So Adobe, Audacity, those are some downloadable pieces of audio. And then you need something to have your microphone attached to. I'm using, let me just kind of shift I've got this attached to a microphone stand with a boom on it. A boom is this arm right here. Can you see me, guys? That just puts it you know, where I wanted to have it in front of me. All right. So moving on, there's thousands of two kinds of microphones. All right. There's a dynamic microphone, which this is also a dynamic. This is your typical bar mic. This is just a regular, you know, rock mic. The difference between the microphone that I'm talking into right now and this microphone are that the dynamic microphone, I have to be right on it. If I'm off, we call this off axis. I'm not talking into the microphone. If I were like this, it sounds great. It would be great for podcasting or anything you're doing. If I'm off it a little bit, it's going to start to really lose quality. You're not going to hear me. All right. This microphone, a condenser microphone, is what I use. You don't have to, but a condenser microphone is good for the following reason. You don't have to be right on it. I'm hoping that my voice doesn't shift dramatically as I'm moving around. Is that your experience?
Yeah.
All right. The purpose of this microphone is it picks up a wide audio pattern. So if I'm off it a little bit, which people normally do when they're in conversation, particularly if your interviews, Graham, are in person, which is actually preferred if it's possible. It's not likely and probably won't be very often, but you know, you'll move around a little bit. So the more you can free yourself up to be you in a conversation, I think the better. If you've got this kind of a microphone, you're pretty tethered to it, you know, and you're going to be sort of locked in. The other difference in a microphone like this, the condenser microphone needs power to operate. They all do. So there's a thing called, this sounds exotic, but it's not, called phantom power. On this Focusrite that I'm using right now, there's a little button right there. Can you see that little red button? It's just something you depress, and all it does is give power to the mic. So it's as simple as that. It doesn't mean anything other than if you've got a condenser mic, you'll have to do that. One of the more popular microphones out there for podcasters, because of its affordability and because it goes USB directly into your computer, is made by the Blue company, Blue Microphones. And it's the, I'm flashing, I'm blanking on the name. It's one that I encouraged Felicia to get at, I'll think of it. Oh, Blue Yeti, like the snowman, YETI, the Blue Yeti. The good thing about it is I recommend it a lot for a couple of reasons. It's a good performing, affordable microphone that goes directly USB into a computer. And it's kind of one-stop shopping. It's got some dials on the back that can change how directional it is. And in fact, you can make it so it can be both people talking into it at the same time from different angles, which frankly, I don't like though. I don't think it really sounds that good. One person inevitably always sounds like they're in another room almost. So I don't recommend it for that, but it's a great affordable mic. All right. So moving on. These mics are very sensitive though. If I get too close to it, does that sound crappy right there? Does it sound like I'm overdoing it?
Yeah.
So with a microphone like that, you want to, and this is one of the good things about it though, is I'm still visual to you. It kind of looks this sort of, if you were using it visually too, if you're doing video recording your podcast, this looks a little more like whiz bang radio for you. It looks like you're a pro. So, but you do want to be off it, but not too much. I don't know if am I dropping out too much back here, or is that?
No, it's okay.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the show. New topic. Your show, your podcast. It has to be interesting. It has to be entertaining. It needs to have sort of a vibe or your point of view. You know, it's unlikely that you're going to be doing a podcast in a genre no one has ever heard of. You're going to join, everybody's out there doing lots of stuff. So it's you we want. It's your point of view. It's the stuff that you curate for your listeners that's going to be interesting. It needs to have movement and forward momentum. It needs to sound organized and consistent. People come back to things that they feel like delight them in a new way each time, but that they know what they're going to get each time as well. So there's a consistency that you're going to want to get, and that's going to come from the sort of the way you organize it. You need to be prepared and you need to be authentic. and you are competing for time, which you know is precious. And there's so much out there that in that competition for their time, it needs to be worth it. So all of those things kind of need to come into it. I know that all sounds very broad and I don't want it to be scary, but it's just all very true. Okay. So your topic, and you've all got ideas of things that you already want to do about. What's your passion? You know, are you really passionate about it? Your expertise or your curiosity. I think there's really something to be said for the name that you choose. I like names that let people know kind of what they're getting into. I love clever and I love interesting and I love intriguing. And it depends on what you're all doing, such different things that there is no one right answer for any of what that is. I just want you to be careful about thinking what that is without getting paralyzed by it. And then the way you describe it, when we get to where you've got your podcast and you're putting it out there into the universe and asking people who are browsing to stop on yours, you know, if you're a knitter, actually I've worked with a couple of women that are doing a podcast about knitting. They're hilarious. They're friends. And they're really great at knitting, but it's about more than knitting. And so you'd be surprised how many knitting podcasts there are out there. So their description and all of that needs to whittle down to where you go, I love knitting, but these two are going to be young and cool and funny and whatever that is. So in the way you describe it, that's how you're going to get them to, grab it off the shelf, right? So those come into play too. And all of that, I think getting that stuff figured out up front helps you to really think through what you're doing and why you're doing it as well. So who's your audience? Graham, who's your audience?
Well, it depends what I'm doing, because my interests are sports or entertainment or even true crime. So, the audience varies.
Okay.
Depending, and also depending who I'm trying to sell it to. The company I wrote for this summer is Wondery, and I did a show for a series called Even the Rich, and that has a largely female demographic, but all their shows are not necessarily that. So it just depends.
Wondery is the big fish, by the way. So congratulations on that.
Thanks.
Right? That's amazing. Jane, who's your audience?
So my audience are administrators, special education administrators within Connecticut school districts, educators, parents, caregivers, and therapists.
Cheryl, who's your audience?
They're going to be technical engineers, engineering managers, buyers at my clients' buyers who are the target of this particular chemical company, buyers at their customers.
Yeah, I'm less worried about you three than I might normally be, but what people who say everybody, that's not the answer. There's two kinds of audience, and this I'm going to refer back to my radio career to make this point. We had in our radio station, and as I think you should think about for yourself, there is a target audience, and then there's an actual audience. So your target audience are the people that you're really super serving. From a technical standpoint, both Jane and Cheryl have more of a genuinely targeted audience of people who have, a narrower interest path toward that. So that's kind of built in. But then outside of that, there will be hopefully people that will be drawn to you that aren't just in that narrow one. So be thinking about super serving your targeted audience, but also being available to a broader audience as well. You want to keep bringing more people into your tent, right? So unless it's a highly specific thing where you're really just talking about a certain kind of, washer that goes with a certain kind of bolt, there's going to be broadened interest. So, and the reason I put in one person at a time is that was for those who are really just getting started and are nervous about sort of the performance part of podcasting. I wanted to make that point of, and you can use this to prep and make feel comfortable your guests, is that remind them that they're not talking to everybody. They're talking to one person at a time. So while you might have an audience of 1,000 or 4,000 people or 3 or whatever it is, you're talking to each one of them individually. And that really helps to kind of focus and calm people down. All right. So I said show sheet doesn't have to be, but I think each time that you're going to make a podcast, you should lay it out. You should know what it is you're trying to accomplish with that. Be aware of what the clock is. If you're doing an hour-long one or a 30-minute one or a 15-minute one, there are elements to whatever that clock is. You know, if it's just one conversation, the entirety of the episode, well, it still has hopefully parts to it. I'm guessing there will be. I would encourage you to have an introduction, the body of what it is you're doing, and a close at a minimum. But within a podcast, I'd really encourage you to think about breaking it up into segments, depending on what you're trying to achieve. You know, these are suggestions that are very broad, and they may not fit what you are trying to accomplish, but be aware of the clock within that time frame. Be aware of how people consume information. You know, we've all got short attention spans. We like to be guided. And also how you transition from one thing into the next. You want to take that listener along with you. So if you're transitioning from opening up and making a comment to presenting the person that you've chosen for your listeners to present to them, and it's not just because someone was available and so you grabbed them, hopefully, I mean, we probably will do that to a certain degree, but in a perfect world, any guest that you are presenting to your listeners who are golden, it's for a purpose. And you can explain in your introduction why you ask them to join you and what you're hoping to accomplish with that. It's also fair to the guest because it gives, you know, it sets them up and gives them sort of a guide of where you're taking them. Okay. So toward that end, that leads me to this point, and this has to do with the construction of the episode. I got a couple of different ways for you to think about this. First of all, I want you to think like your favorite teacher. Graham, have you got a teacher in mind that you've had from kindergarten to last Tuesday that you thought was an excellent teacher?
Yeah, I do, I think.
What's the name?
Oh, well, let's see. I guess I'll go back to 5th grade.
Okay.
God, is that possible? 5th grade, Mr. Keemon.
What made him a great teacher to you, Graham?
There was just something very warm and compassionate about his methods. You know, I felt kind of safe and listened to, and you know, he just seemed genuinely interested.
Love it.
In
Jane,
these kids.
Jane, have you got a favorite teacher?
I've got two. I've got one called Mr. Walters, who was incredible at getting us connected to history and the world around us, whether it was natural or architecture, which I enjoyed. And Miss Clifton, when I was much younger, in terms of language and books. So those are two inspirational teachers.
So very quickly, if you were able to go meta, what do you think that teacher was doing that from a programming standpoint made him a great teacher, of how he got you interested in a topic you didn't know you were going to be interested in?
He was passionate about things, so he would just share and relay that passion to us, but he did it in a way to help us as an individual connect to it. So
Okay.
He took us on a journey with him. We weren't next to him, we were actually participating with him.
Cheryl, how about you?
If I go back to high school, a favorite literature teacher was Mr. Weil, was his name. And Jane made an important point just regarding connection. He was really good at communicating. He was enthusiastic about his subject, but just really good at connecting with individual students, making you feel like, you know, you were the only one out of 20 some students, but, you know, a real connection and communicating his passion.
So we just described really, these are the tenets of your presentation, right? What great teachers do are, you know, particularly in a certain kind of, you know, point of view that you would bring into a podcast, are exactly the kinds of things you need to do. Being empathetic, making people feel like you're really communicating with them on a personal level, having that passion about it. And, you know, obviously knowing their stuff cold, right? And what great teachers do is they're not spending the entire time explaining to you so you can take the notes and go, oh yeah, now I get it. they're making light bulbs go off. They're leading you to making discoveries. And I think at your best with your performances in your podcasts, if you can get the listener to do the heavy lifting and go on the trip with you by the way you do that and get the light bulbs to go off, that's when you can own them, okay? And also I threw in another way to look at this, which is think like a painter. And the reason I like this is I like the idea of knowing when to put the brush down. When's the painting done? So I want you to work on your podcast every episode. I want you to frame the thing. I want you to take us where the focus should be, as a great painter would do, have color in it, have motion in it, but also know when it's done, and then you move on. Okay. So those are sort of just some big thoughts to think about with as you prepare yourself intellectually to do this work. Now, you as a performer, thinking about, and I say performer not in a way that's inauthentic, because we do have to keep them entertained and interested, no matter how serious the topic. So that presentation, you've got a version of yourself, you've got a brand, you've got something about you that is unique. So being an authentic version of yourself. I'm in a little bit more of a hype mode right now with the three of you than I would be if I was just having a conversation with my parents or a conversation with a buddy from high school. You know, I'm putting on a little bit of a hyped show for you. I'm trying to look as relaxed as I can. I'm trying to feel as I'm trying to bond a connection with you. I'm trying to do the things right now subliminally that I'm encouraging you to do. And then you have to just leave it to, you know, you're not going to fully know if that's working or not, particularly in this kind of a medium where you don't get to see the people you're talking to eye to eye. You know, that's tough to do, but there's a pace and there's a rhythm to what you do as well. For example, when you're talking about something, it's easy to get into the hype of it and to talk quickly, to go too fast, to think that, you know, well, surely I need to rush through this because this isn't probably that interesting to them. And I don't know. Pauses. And this kind of like, I'm using a tactic right now. In that, when I slow down and I make my points like this, it seems more interesting. And when I bring my voice down into a little bit of a whisper, now, not to do it inauthentically, but people just like, oh, this must be interesting, you know? And I'm just saying, these are tactics of the way I'm using my hands right now. There are things that we do that we can do and should do that are authentic, but it's a version of yourself that's just a little bit more elevated to keep them interested. And I'm going to guess some of your favorite teachers were doing that as well. And also being the keeper of the clock, knowing where you are in that program you're putting together, because you can get carried away. All right, I want to make a real quick couple of points about story, because storytelling is important in anything that you do. Graham, mostly for you, but for all of us. And I put the logo from CBS Sunday Morning just because there's such great storytelling on that show. But stories happen to those who tell them. What does that mean? Well, things happen to all of us. But for those of us who are good at storytelling, we're connecting dots. We walk by the same things other people walk by, but we stop to see them. We connect them to something else and make a broader point that might put a light bulb in place. It's a hook. It's a way to find something to get your point across. Be looking for those things that you might otherwise walk by. So, you know, there's a million examples I could give to you of that. You could be, you know, photographers do it all the time. They take a picture of a flower in a park that you walk by every day and you're like, oh God, there it was. You know, I didn't look at it that way. But look for ways to make connections. So real quickly, this is from, I grabbed this from a book I was reading about TED Talks. And in this case, this person broke down the biggest TED Talks on the internet and looked for the commonalities. And the commonalities of what made them great were very interesting. And it turns out that it's no different than what the Greeks did. This stuff is as old as culture. So the three things that made a TED Talk great, which is the three things that make for primarily for a really interesting presentation, and we can use this in all of our storytelling. It starts with ethos, logos, and pathos, which is what the Greeks said. It has this. The first thing is credibility. Who are you and why should I care? Why should I listen to you? That is, I needed to establish that credibility at the beginning of this presentation. I let you know that I was in radio. So hopefully you're thinking, well, if he did a radio show for 29 years, I guess he knows how to perform audio, hopefully. Logos, having the goods. That's the meat of what you're talking about. That's the information that you want them to know that they either don't know or don't know the way you're telling it to them. And then pathos is the storytelling. It's really the bonding agent. It's the way that you get it across. It's the way you make it interesting and entertaining. The things that were interesting to me, and I don't remember off the top of my head what the numbers were to make them add up to 100. But ethos, the credibility part, 15, 25, I think it was 15% was the ethos. It was a relatively small number. You can get the credibility thing you can establish fairly quickly. If they're going to log on to your podcast, they already assume that you're credible. Having the goods is a smaller part of this than you would think. The actual information is a smaller part of it. It's obviously very important, but 60% of it, I do remember that number, 60% of it had to do with the storytelling. That's the part that made people remember. And you know this, I'm guessing already, but when you connect to someone's emotions, that's when you can take them anywhere you want to go. So even if it's a technical topic, there are ways to make that into a connection and into stories, giving it context, finding ways to make it come alive for people. That's when that thing, I'm sure you've seen it in memes or on cards, even as if people don't remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel, right? We've all seen that. It's true. And that's what this is about too. And that's very much going to be the case for you with your podcasts. So the art of the interview, first of all, if you don't get great audio on that interview, it didn't happen, right? I mean, if it's, I don't know how you're going to, if those of you who might be or are going to be doing 2-person, 3-person doing interviews, you want to make sure that everybody from an audio standpoint sounds good. People are fine with, if I sound like this on my end and my interviewee sounds like they're on the phone, that's fine. People are used to that. They know that somebody's remote and that's fine. But you want to get good audio quality, and that's on us to do that. If something sounds terrible and crackly and it's cutting in and out and you're stepping over each other, you want to get those things ironed out before you begin and practice with that. Record some things, use your teenage child to record something with and checking on, and also stuff works one day, you plug it in the same way the next day, and some weird reason it doesn't work the same way. So you do want to get your technical game together if you're doing interviews. Interview versus conversation. Conversations are obviously what you want it to sound like. Depending on what it is, though, some things are a flat interview. I'm asking questions, you're answering the questions. That's more of a journalistic thing. But the more conversational it can be, probably the more listenable it will be. And you can make an interview sound conversational. Prepping your guests and making them feel comfortable. I touched that on that a little bit earlier. One of the mistakes I would make in radio is I would have really the interview before the interview. In chatting with them before we went on, like during a record, for example, you'd wind up having the conversation sometimes. And then when you went on the radio, it was like trying to recreate something that had already gone very well in its natural state. So you want to prep them and make them feel comfortable, but you don't want to necessarily, you want to get it when it's organic. Let them know what it is you want to get from them, but put them in a position to be themselves. And it's also, I think, important to really know why you want to talk to them and what you're hoping to get from them. And then really settle in and listen, because you're going to get some opportunities in that to ask some things you didn't think you were going to do, or go in a direction that maybe you didn't think you were going to go, as long as it doesn't take you off a path you needed to be on. Okay. Sometimes people will talk on and on and on and on without stopping. And that's a problem for editing, but it's also a problem. And some people nervously will do that. And they'll also do it because they think they're doing you a favor. If you don't jump in, they'll think their job is to fill dead air until you stop them. So if you've got someone like that, you're going to need to stop them. And there's something I would say it's not an interruption, but it's sort of pumping the brakes. It's a soft redirection. So you can jump in on someone and say, oh, absolutely, I like what you just said about whatever, but let's talk about. So it's a brake pump. I'm jumping in, taking control again, thanking them for something, and then for the audience's sake, pushing it in a new direction. You follow me on that? You know, there's kind of an art to that, to helping them help you help them, in a way. All right. Any questions on anything so far? Okay. Programming notes. We're identifying ourselves. We're identifying our guest. If it's a long form thing, I think it's good, even though in a podcast it's different from a broadcast where people typically are just joining you in the middle of something. I think it is nice to, every once in a while, reset what you're doing. Welcome to the XYZ podcast. We're talking with so-and-so today about such and such. And he was just talking about, and by the way, if you're doing a long form thing, this is a great way to break it up. You could do a segment that way where if you've got a 20-minute interview with somebody, 20 minutes is a long time. Now it could be, if it's the president of a company that everybody's very interested in hearing from, or it's a rock star, I don't know what it is, let it go. But if it's something that's technical or something that, you might break that up and say, my guest is so-and-so, and we're talking about this. And in our next segment, I want to get to this, that, and the other. You're teasing it to go forward. You're holding on to your listener and asking them to come back for a certain reason right after this segment, whatever it is. And then you could put in another segment. So if you've got a 30-minute program, you can have little ways to break that up. People get fidgety. So if you can take a 20-minute interview and put it into 2 10 minutes with something in between, that could be every week or every however, whatever the distance is between your podcasts. If it's once a month, maybe there's something that you do each time that's a what I would call a benchmark. And that's where it says segmenting and benchmarking. That's where I'm talking about, maybe breaking it up into little pieces for people, to keep people engaged and to keep that momentum I was talking about and that flow. Maybe each podcast you have a spotlight on one kind of thing that fits into what you talk about. Maybe it's something that's, out of a journal. Maybe it's a new development in something, or it's something from the news that's, germane somehow. You can put a little spotlight on that and produce that separately and insert it. It sounds produced and sounds big time. And it also gives them a break, and then you re-engage them. So those are just little tricks to hold people and make them feel like they're listening to a show and not just a really long conversation. Okay, just a thought. Keep it tight. Not everything is interesting, even though it might be interesting to you. And it's going to be tough for you to do this. But, and this is, I'm going to hit on this too when I talk about editing. But everything's interesting to you, but that doesn't mean it's all interesting to the listener. And you want to put on another hat if you can, or maybe get another opinion from somebody whose opinion you value. But some stuff may need to get cut out. Maybe I got it, and then we went on and we said the same thing again. Maybe we find a way to, cut some of that out, but keep it tight, because again, every decision you make is for your listeners, the listeners that are your fans and the listeners you're constantly trying to bring into your tent. You're asking people to come back, and they're going to do that if you do some of these kinds of things that will make them feel like that 30 minutes felt like 10. Okay. So segments are good. Constantly telling them what you're going to be doing and taking them along as teachers do. Teachers start by talking, here's what we're going to talk about today, and here's what we're doing. And they start to do it, and they break things up. I do encourage you very strongly, because people are used to consuming media in segments of time. We're used to a half-hour show. We're used to an hour show. With podcasting, it's a little bit different because it's whatever you want it to be. There is no clock to worry about, but we're used to that already. So we're used to increments of times. Now, podcast could be a 5-minute quick hit thing every day. It could be 15 minutes. It could be a 1-hour thing. You do four segments of, and it's done, and then you move on to another thing. Whatever it is, though, keep it consistent, not only in length, but keep it consistent in delivery. People want to know what they're getting, just like they do in our friendships. If you're super manic, one day with your friends and the next day you're Eeyore, it's going to be kind of like, I don't know which Scott I'm getting here. So it's just, that's a sometimes friend. People like some consistency and know what they're getting. And, you want it to be appointment listening. So, I would encourage you to really train your audience to know that my show is going to drop every Thursday at 2:00, whatever it is, or once a month on it's whatever Wednesday, whatever, you can make some alliteration with that, but train them to make it an appointment. So I sort of just started to talk about this a little bit, but with editing, what stays, what goes. If something is weak, don't put it in. You're punishing your audience and you're going to drive them away. If you're very excited about a special guest you got, I think it's hard for some people to edit those because they think they personalize cutting out what they said with the relationship itself. You must make decisions based on what you're handing your listeners. And you got to, I think, separate yourself from, there are people that are public speakers that will interview other public speakers, and they think because they've got a friendship with them, they don't dare edit that out. And I think it's a big mistake. And it can take a long time to edit some of this stuff. If you're really getting serious about it, and you can, like I said, know when to put the brush down and let some things go. But if you're trying to edit out every little double clutch thing someone said, or every time, you cleared your throat and all that, you can do it. And maybe you should if you got the time. But I talked to one podcaster who was consistently doing a very good podcast. And she said her 30 minutes of audio took her 4 hours to edit. She put a lot of energy into that. She later told me that she wasn't going to do that anymore because it was just taking too much. So the takeaway on that is either, she was, giving up on her commitment to her audience, or maybe she was being a little anal retentive to begin with. I mean, I don't know what that really suggested, and when editing, stay big picture. Try to keep an ear of a listener in mind as you're hearing it back. It's also good to walk away from this stuff and then come back to it a day or two later. You've done that, I'm sure, with writing. If you've ever written something really important, whether it's just an email to somebody, you kind of get it out there and then you come back to it. So, you can do that as well. All right, just from a technical standpoint, once it's done, it's got to go somewhere. So there are this part's not as painful as you might think. And there are a lot of free ones. There's 2 ways to do this. There are sites to go to that are free, and there are sites that you go to where you pay varying amounts of money. I've heard people say, free's good. Free's always really good. But when you pay money for something, you're typically getting something for that. And what you're getting by paying a little bit with some of these sites is that you can maintain control of your product. With some of the free ones, in the fine print, you're not necessarily maintaining the ownership of your material the way you might think you are, not in any sinister way. And to those who are, some of this doesn't matter, but, I would say, Graham, for you might want to really pay attention to, it's your product, and you want to make sure that you are not surrendering anything in so doing. Even if it's $5 a month, though, you're getting more back for that than some others. Anchor FM is one. Spreaker. You could literally just Google this for those sites, and they're pretty intuitive. So you record it, you edit it. In my case, I record this stuff, I edit it in my MacBook. And then when I've got everything the way I want it, I upload it to, for me, I went to Anchor FM. I'm not promoting it. It was easy. And what I was doing it wasn't a huge deal. And from there, that site and these other sites will then send it out to all of those places where you want it to be, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Play or all of those, big places where you'd want it. It will send those for you, and you'll get this little notification that you're out there, and everybody can get to you, tune in, all those places. So once it's out there, it's just sitting there with millions and millions of other things. So you gotta let people know you're open for business. I put that picture in there. I found it personally hilarious, only because that's the worst sign I ever saw in my life, and yet it's so direct. Fingerprinting next door. Okay. I mean, it's like, there's no art to that. They don't need it. You need to get fingerprinted. Here we are. So where's your audience? Where will they be listening? You want to, this is where you can bring in a professional if you can afford it. But if not, you can find some ways to try to find people. When I was saying, I referenced this at the beginning of my presentation about the keywords that you choose to sort of describe your podcast when it's on these sites. That's where that search stuff, that search engine optimization, that SEO, they call it, where people will, look for. The example I put there is guys who are really interested, or women who are interested in muscle cars. If you put certain hashtags to some of those, it will pop up when someone that likes muscle cars is looking for podcasts about that, or knitting, or anything. And then free marketing. Well, you can develop fans, first of all, through having a consistent product, keeping the few who start with you and keep adding to them. Make them into fans and let them share their discovery of you. Encourage them to tell friends and try to build the audience organically. If you have a guest on, asking them to cross promote for you. Can you please let all of your listeners, or all of your, who's ever in their sphere with whatever expertise they have, ask them to go to work for you if you can. And then also trying to get yourself out there as well. You've got your podcast. That makes you an expert now. Okay. That makes you a product now. Run with that, because it's real, even if it starts as a small thing. And maybe be a guest on other people's and start to branch out. Those are free ways to get yourself out there. Okay.